Just want to thank our Congresswoman Annie Kuster for being here. She will tell her story, of course, but I want to thank all the survivors who are standing here and all the advocates who are speaking their own truth to power. I thought what we saw today was extraordinary for many reasons. I thought Dr. Blasey Ford was powerful. She was sincere. She was heartfelt. You could see how this trauma has affected her whole life. She told a story of the worst moment of her life in front of cameras, in front of the world, and did it bravely. I thought she was a hero. I thought she showed courage. I thought she showed dignity. I think she spoke for a lot of people. And I think during her testimony, certainly I was in tears at times, and I think many women were across the globe because she really spoke that truth for all of us. And her courage shone brightly. And I think she was a great light for this country, and I think she was a great light for all of us. I cannot say that about the second half of the hearing. I was very disturbed by how I was so disturbed by how Judge Kavanaugh began his statement. He was extremely political and was very aggressive and arrogant at times, and I was very disturbed by his dismissiveness of appropriate questions that members of the committee were asking. He was dismissive of their questions. He wouldn't answer their questions, and the one question he wouldn't answer, even though he was asked by 5 different senators, is, will you support an FBI background check? Will you support the completion of a proper FBI investigation? And he kept obfuscating, he kept pivoting, he kept talking about 4 people who said it didn't happen. Well, that's not actually what they said. They didn't say it didn't happen, they said they didn't remember it. It's very different. So I think he misled the committee on many instances. I think he was not truthful about his drinking. I think he was not truthful about what his yearbook meant. I think he was not truthful about whether he could ever remember something after a night of drinking. He joked about it after his bus trip to watch a baseball game. So in many ways, today is a high moment and an inspiring moment for all of us because of what Dr. Blasey Ford accomplished and what she did and what she was able to do. But I also think it's a very low moment. I think the way the Republican senators on that committee acted, what they said, treating Judge Kavanaugh as the victim, was disturbing, and it was disappointing. And I think American people and American women and survivors saw that as a statement of disregard of them, of their stories, of their truth, of why this hearing is so important. This is not a political stunt by anyone. This is a woman who wanted to be heard because she had grave concerns about someone who was named to be the next Supreme Court justice. She was doing her civic duty. She was giving of herself and reliving a trauma to do the right thing. And that testimony was treated with such disregard by her Republican colleagues. I think what they're doing now is they intend to railroad this, to just send it straight through. They aren't going to allow the FBI to complete the background investigation of the 3 allegations. We're clearly not going to have any hearing or any deliberation about the 2 most recent allegations. And I feel that the way they acted and what they said was harmful to women everywhere and to our voices, to our views, to our value. And I just hope the American people paid attention, because it was very clear to me that they were not doing their constitutional duty. They were just playing politics. Our next speaker is Congresswoman Annie Kuster, who is from New Hampshire and an amazing advocate and a great friend.
Thank you for being with us tonight. As a survivor of sexual assault at a fraternity party at an Ivy League college over 40 years ago, what I remember most distinctly was the humiliation, the shame, and the fear that I felt running out into the dark, bitter cold night. I remember the sound of the pounding music. I remember the faces of the crowd jeering and laughing. I remember the shock and the surprise that I felt from the attack. What I don't remember the date. It was likely a Saturday night during my first winter on campus. I don't remember the time. I'd guess it was likely around midnight after an evening of dancing and fun. But I will never forget my assailant, a classmate egged on by his fraternity brothers. I tell this story not because it is remarkable or unique. Sadly, I tell this story because it is all too common. Let's be clear. Sexual assault perpetuates the gender hierarchy. Assailants have the luxury of forgetting, based upon their lack of respect and empathy for their prey. But survivors, we can never forget, however hard we may try over the years to bury those flashes of memory. Despite our best efforts, our trauma lives on in the nooks and crannies of our minds, only to resurface again when we are reminded of the unfairness. I never told a soul about my attack for 40 years. What if no one believed me? What would have come of it? I was ashamed, I was humiliated, and I was afraid. But trust me on this. If my assailant was ever nominated for a lifetime appointment to the United States Supreme Court, where he would decide the fate and the future of women and girls across this great nation for generations to come, I would report every detail. If you believe, as I do, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's recollection of the sexual assault by Brett Kavanaugh, it seems to me there are three possibilities to describe Judge Kavanaugh's lack of memory of the events that Professor Ford describes. Number one, he cannot remember because he's not being truthful. Number two, he cannot remember because his memory was impaired from alcohol. Or number three, the most sinister of all, he does not remember because that evening was not remarkable or even distinguishable from other parties in his past. That is the basis of privilege and the core structure of gender discrimination in our society. No person is entitled to a seat on the United States Supreme Court, just as no person is entitled to sexual contact with anyone against their will or without their affirmative consent. Judging from the statements of some Republican senators, confusion surrounding this premise lies at the heart of the controversy engulfing the president's nominee to the Supreme Court. So let me be very clear. The standard for the Senate's decision whether to confirm a Supreme Court nomination is not the criminal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. To the contrary, the burden of proof in a legislative procedure is to affirm confirmation for a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. And this must require the highest level of scrutiny imaginable. Namely, that this person demonstrates the highest level of moral character, including honesty, empathy, and compassion for all persons. So in closing, I applaud the courage and grace of Dr. Ford for her clear and compelling testimony today. I believe her, and I believe that our future depends on getting this right. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Jess Davidson, a survivor and executive director of a wonderful organization called End Rape on Campus.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I first want to address Dr. Blasey Ford. Dr. Blasey Ford, you are extraordinary, and I want to commend you for your bravery. In my role at End Rape on Campus, I work with thousands of survivors and their loved ones every year. Dr. Ford, thank you for describing what we have experienced. I'm in awe of you. I've been thinking a lot lately about a dream that I sometimes have, where I'm in a room with other people, and they're walking, they're talking, they're laughing, but as I walk through the room, trying to talk and laugh with them, I realize that no one can see me. No one can hear me. It's as if everyone is staring right through me. Maybe you've had this dream too, or maybe you've seen movies or TV that use this archetype where a character is seeing and is hearing and is experiencing what's happening all around them. But when they talk, no one hears them. They are sure that this is reality. They demand to be seen. They wave their arms. They demand to be heard. They scream out into the void, but they are not heard. Now, imagine that you've experienced this, and after you experience this, you go and you tell your family and friends what you've experienced, and they don't believe you. That scream into the void is what so many survivors of sexual assault experience when they are asking to simply be believed and supported. That scream into the void is how I felt when people on my campus knew who my rapist was, and they stayed friends with him anyways. It's how I felt when my campus violated federal Title IX guidelines that were in place during my Title IX investigation and did great harm to me in doing so. It is how I felt when the American electorate did not believe that committing sexual violence was disqualifying from any kind of political office, let alone the presidency of the United States. And it is how I and millions of survivors across the country have felt watching this week's debate about whether or not the claims of Dr. Kirsten Blasey Ford, Deborah Ramirez, and Julie Swetnick were disqualifying for a lifetime appointment on the highest court in our land. This week, survivors of sexual assault around the country have been screaming. And many of us have felt our screams only received by the void, and certainly not by the Senate Judiciary Committee. The way that Senate Republicans have handled this, failing to uphold their obligation to carefully consider these allegations has, to me, not shown any type of careful consideration for survivors. If anything, their treatment has denied survivors and women across the country their dignity and their humanity. Tens of thousands of survivors of sexual assault have shared their most personal and painful stories online and in person, all in the hopes that their elected officials will stop the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, or at the very least, show that careful consideration is being given with a little bit of a more thorough investigation. And if Dr. Blasey Ford is treated this way, if I, as a white woman with so much privilege, was treated the way that I was, think about how hard we make it for the people most disproportionately impacted by sexual violence. People of color, queer people, disabled people, trans folks, domestic workers, anybody from a currently or historically disenfranchised community. We make it nearly impossible for anyone to get justice in this country when they're a survivor. And we make it especially hard for folks on the margins. The current state of affairs is unacceptable. Many survivors have shared personal details this week that they might not share under different circumstances in very, very public places. Recounting gut-wrenching details of one's own trauma is a horrible and difficult thing to do. It is not fun. It is not done lightly. But many survivors have described to me an inordinate pressure this week to share these gut-wrenching details of their worst horrors in order to be heard by this body, by the people who represent them. Survivors are sharing this because they feel their screams must get louder and more gruesome in order for Senate Republicans to take them seriously at all. Survivor responses and reporting cannot be prescripted to a checklist that determines validity. Since these allegations have become public, I have seen survivors putting their trauma on display and bearing more than they should have to in a desperate attempt to be heard and for survivor stories to be believed. And this is not the first time that survivors have been asked to do this in order for their traumas and stories to be considered valid or worthy of hearing at all. Millions of people around the world did so this fall when the Me Too movement took on new levels of public discourse. My peers and I did so over the last several years of trying to bring the campus sexual assault movement to the forefront of this nation's attention. And so have so many who have come before us. As I watch this pattern repeat itself over and over and over again, I have to ask, how many more times will survivors have to show you their scars to prove that they were bleeding? How many more ways do survivors need to beg to be believed before our democratically elected representatives just to get them to prioritize a process that is fair to survivors and prioritizes fairness over political expediency? How many more viral movements do we have to create before the incredible harm and trauma that we have experienced will be enough to be taken seriously when a survivor comes forward? And why? Why is the burden always shifted to us, the people who have experienced harm? Enough. To move forward without an FBI investigation, without subpoenaing Mark Judge or any corroborating witnesses, and without giving Deborah Ramirez and Julie Swetnick a chance to testify is a stain on this body and an extreme betrayal to survivors of sexual assault. This process must be suspended, and Judge Kavanaugh must withdraw his nomination. Survivors are watching. I'm now very excited to introduce Daniela, an organizer with an amazing organization that I admire so much, the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. My name is Daniela Contreras. I've been a domestic worker. I am an immigrant. I'm an organizer. And me too. I'm a survivor. The first time I experienced sexual violence, I was 16 years old, just a little older than Dr. Blasey Ford. I got a job as a nanny, caring for a 3-year-old boy, while his parents were at work. I was so excited because it meant helping my family financially. One day, the dad arrived home and immediately went to take a shower. He called my name to help him with something. When I arrived at the bathroom, he exposed himself to me. I felt scared and paralyzed by shock. I took the child to another room, but he followed us. He began to touch and sexually assault me right in front of his child. It was one of the most terrifying experiences in my life. I was able to get away. A neighbor knocked on the door, and I ran out of that house. But out of fear, embarrassment, I kept silent for almost 2 decades. This wasn't my first experience with sexual violence, but it wasn't my last. Today, I'm an organizer with the National Domestic Workers Alliance in New York City. Every day, I hear stories of women just like me, stories full of pain, fear, silence, and shame. But through our organizing, we pass laws and policies to protect domestic workers. We make sure survivors know that they're not alone. I'm also a proud mother of a 6-year-old girl. And I never, ever in my life want my daughter to go through for what I've been through. Today is this day we say enough is enough. To those people in power who perpetrate abuse, let me tell you one thing, your time is up. Sexual violence has no place in our society, not in Hollywood, not in domestic work, and not in the highest court in this land. Brett Kavanaugh should withdraw now. It's time to put survivors at the center. It's time we do justice for our daughters, our mothers, and for the thousands of women who experience sexual violence at work, at home, and the places where they believe they're safe, but we know they're not. Why am I speaking right now? Well, let me ask you, would you have believed me as a teenager? Probably not. How about now? Almost 20 years now. Did you believe survivors? Because I do. Dr. Kirsten Blasey, we believe you. Deborah Ramirez, we believe you. Julie Swetnick, we believe you. Professor Anita Hill, we have believed you. Your courage is contagious. You're strong, you're brave, and we survivors, we thank you. Nosotras sí les creemos. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Emily Waters, Sisters in Strength Program alumni, Girls for Gender Equity.
Thank you so much. Maybe I would like to invite everyone to take a breath, if you would, with me. I know I need one, so we can just. And before I begin, I wanted to share a poem that I wrote my senior year of college. Somebody almost walked off with all of my stuff, and I would have let him. Holding sorrow in my skin, put my scars up for show, thought my body could be his medicine. Clipped my wings, taped them to his hands. I cannot make someone fly who is used to the ground. Crushed my feathers into a fist. My body knows what it's like to get dressed after a punch, to hold the strikes behind glasses. I know the return when he presents me my wings like he made them, makes them heavy with his tears. Stealing my stuff from me, don't make it yours, makes it stolen. Back sore from trying to share my flight, from trying to be good, trying to be worth something. I just wanted to be worth something. My name is Emily Waters. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Emily Waters, and I am from Girls for Gender Equity, based in Brooklyn, New York. I stand before you as an artist, an activist, a truth teller, and a survivor. Today, Americans were able to bear witness to the power of a survivor speaking their truth. As a young person in Girls for Gender Equity's programs, we learned about the power of truth-telling through the story of Anita Hill. In her book, Speaking Truth to Power, Professor Hill wrote, "Women who accuse men, particularly powerful men, of harassment are often confronted with the reality of the men's sense that they are more important than women as a group." Today's incredible testimony by Dr. Blasey Ford was about just this. Speaking your truth and reclaiming your power. The entire ordeal of Dr. Blasey Ford disclosing the violence she suffered at the hands of Brett Kavanaugh reminds us that perpetrators of violence will go to extraordinary lengths to maintain power over those they harm. Since #MeToo went viral just about a year ago, thanks to the incredible storytelling and activism of Tarana Burke, we have witnessed survivors flip the power script. Finally, we bear witness to the power of survivors everywhere, naming and speaking aloud their experiences uninterrupted. The courage of survivors sharing their long-hidden pain, bravery, and anger has begun to change the way survivors are heard and believed. Today and every day, I say this: Dr. Blasey Ford, we hear you, we see you, and we believe you. Professor Anita Hill, we still hear you, we still see you, and we always believed you. To folks across the gender spectrum who do not see their stories represented in the media right now, we see you, we hear you, we believe you. All of the survivors who have come forward before, since, and after Me Too, to all the survivors who we may never know, we hear you, we see you, and we believe you. Like Dr. Blasey Ford, when I was 15 years old, I was sexually assaulted. This person was 25. Like Dr. Blasey Ford, I waited a long time to share my story. It took me a year to go to the police. I was not believed. I was asked why I took so long to report. My last 3 years of college, I experienced emotional, physical, and sexual abuse and threats to my life by an intimate partner. This time, I did not think I was worth protecting. I did not report. I did not go to the police. Like Dr. Blasey Ford and so many survivors, I kept my truth to myself. Surviving sexual violence makes many of us question our own sense of power, our own worth. Today's hearing and Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony gives me great hope that the next person who comes forward and discloses their survivorship will be believed. They will reclaim their power. They will speak their truth even if it scares them. So it is better to speak remembering we were never meant to survive, said Audre Lorde. Those who perpetrate harm must be held accountable. They should not be rewarded, much less appointed to the highest court in our country. Brett Kavanaugh, withdraw your nomination from the Supreme Court. Members of the United States Senate, meet the courage of survivors like me with your own. Do the right thing and vote no to Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. We will remember. Survivors always do. Thank you. And thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Tatiana Perkins, sexual assault survivor, advocate, and recent graduate.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all for sharing. It's extremely hard to come up to any space and disclose something extremely personal like that. I've been feeling very drained doing the same thing a lot recently, and I know all of you feel that too, so thank you. My name is Tatiana. I am 22 years old, and I'm from Seattle, Washington. So there were 3 defining features of my 8th year in life. The first one is that I beat Pokemon Silver on my own. The second one is that I was really good at reading, so I got advanced literacy classes, which was really great. And the third one is that I was raped. I learned a lot of things in my childhood, and I really learned that it didn't matter what clothes you wear, how old you were, where you're from, who you are, what you believe in. Your autonomy and authority over your own body can be taken away at any moment. An entire summer of my childhood was spent hating myself every time the assault happens. I thought it was my fault. I couldn't tell my family because it was family that did it. I spent my adolescence trying to prove to myself that I was worth anything. You know, my family still doesn't know the full story. I didn't share my experience with anyone until I found a community that I knew would believe and support me. 10 years later, I joined Planned Parenthood's Teen Council, a peer-led sex education program, and it was life-changing. I learned how to take control of my own body and my own life and turn my pain into power. I truly believe if it wasn't for Planned Parenthood, I would still be trapped in the mindset of that little 8-year-old girl. I learned about consent and what that means every step of the way. And with that, I hope that my own experience can help others through theirs. I don't tell my story because I want to. I tell my story because I have to. It scares me every time I do it. Author Maya Angelou shared the same fate as me. She couldn't speak on the issue for years. She physically couldn't speak on it, but when she started talking, she had a lot to say. She became a great inspiration and has thoughtfully proclaimed, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." I am here in solidarity with all other survivors and those who cannot share their story. I'm here today because too many people have experienced rape and sexual assault. I'm here because far too many of them don't have the support that they need to report it, and the ones that have reported it have been shamed and silenced when they did. Now we're watching that culture play on the national stage. I believe Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. I believe Deborah Ramirez. I believe Julie Swetnick. I believe survivors. I am a survivor. This is the moment of truth for every member of the Senate. What senators do will determine whether they stand with women and survivors or they stand against us. We have been through too much pain, too much to have our pain dismissed by politicians who only care about tilting the balance of the Supreme Court to take away women's bodily autonomy. Senators must reject Brett Kavanaugh and call for this nomination to be withdrawn. Thank you.